son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, welcome back once again. It is the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast, and I've never had a guest return so fast, but after hearing that this was also one of your areas of expertise, I had to have you back on. Please welcome to the show historian, author, and educator, Chris Verga.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we were kind of wrapping up on the last one, which has not gone live yet, but I'm sure by the time this one goes out, it will have gone live. Your areas of expertise that I know you from are Long Island military history and espionage history of Long Island, and even a lot of the civil rights issues that have been plaguing Long Island for, 200 years. But one of your other areas of expertise is terrorism. And I'm just wondering if you could quickly kind of explain what led you to that? Was it looking at all the Long Island stuff, or were you looking into terrorism first and then realized there were so many examples on Long Island?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it. I started with anti-government groups, and I said it before in your other podcast. It's like pulling a thread on a sweater,
right?
And then all of a sudden you fall down the rabbit hole. I do teach politics of terrorism at John Jay College, and specifically, I got into it when I was doing civil rights research for a couple of my books, especially about the Klan. 1 in 7 people in Long Island back in the 20s and 30s were Klan members.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's insane. And it was a reaction to changing demographics. That was the big thing. And you know how they always say the replacement theory is a new thing? Nah, I beg to differ. That's been around for a very, very long time. Because if you look at a lot of the Klan stuff that I looked through, which, by the way, you can find in Suffolk County Historical Society in Riverhead. You go ask for Victoria Berger. She's the curator there. And
she'll already know.
And ask her that you want to see the Klan box. First, she's going to give you a weird look, and then she's like, oh yeah, Verga recommended you get it. Because it's one of those really uncomfortable histories, and you're going to get that awkward, weird look from the side of her eye, that weird, uneasy laugh maybe. But when you look in this Klan box, the quote-unquote Klan files, it's every membership card of Klan members from Suffolk, Nassau, Queens, and Brooklyn. And it averages out, if you do the numbers on how many Klan numbers are there, 1 in 7. But when you look at the literature, it's talking about replacement. That's the reoccurring theme, replacement theory, even back then. The Catholics coming from Italy, Eastern Europe are going to replace us white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's replacement. They use the word so clear. It is nothing new. The replacement theory has been used and it's been used to fan the flames of these groups, such as the KKK. And within that box, we also saw ballot inspection certificates assigned to various Klan members, so you can see how they came into power. And the Klan is a terrorist group, but it's also an anti-government group. Today, we got a couple of how we classify them. We got anti-government groups, militaristic groups, accelerationist groups, and you got your terrorist groups. So we're all going to pull this in, but let's see.
Let's keep unpacking.
Okay, good. So your accelerationist groups is what we see today, and even back kind of after the Klan, kind of the Bund. The accelerationist groups are the ones that are going to create conflict to have a broader conflict. So they're the ones that want to issue in the Civil War. That's what they want to do. Like with the Bund, the German-American Bund, aka American Nazis, etc., they were talking about the Tag, der Tag, the day. So they were talking about the day when they will rise up from all this instability in America, make everything normal, and everyone will depend on a fascist government. That's an accelerationist. We have tons of those operating right now, but once again, not another new thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to have these accelerationist groups, anti-government groups, and terrorist groups, and you're going to see kind of the birth of them during the 1920s and 30s. And even when the Bund did disappear, you have the American Renaissance Party up in Yorkville, And that was operating under the same context as an accelerationist group. They're going to rise up. And then you got these conservative groups, such as the Birch Society, that's weaving their way in there as well, trying to get a more broader audience. I know we look at the Birch Society as outliers for right and left and just regular, normal people. But at the end of the day, that was a right-wing powerhouse. Now they're kind of outliers, but they were actually
at a time.
At a time. Now we just look at them as, kind of just a joke, but they were a really big media outlet for far-right conservatism and also that bridge to pull people in. So let's see, militaristic groups is the groups that are going to hang out in the backwoods, that are going to yell at the clouds, essentially. They're the ones that are going to move in after you have the accelerationist groups cause that reaction. Michigan Militia is the most obvious one. The Base, which is a neo-Nazi group that operates in Georgia, even on a local level, historically speaking. You got the Christian Front, Father Colligan, which is another militaristic group, essentially. Once again, they're going to build that army. They take that Second Amendment another way. Second Amendment just doesn't always say right to regulate a right to bear arms and militia. It also says militia, state militia, and they're going to run with that. And you see how people go crazy with defining the Second Amendment. What's an arm? They take that to another level. It was like, well, if we have arms, can we give it to a militia group? So, you got responsible gun owners, and then all of a sudden you got your far extremists. But you have those everywhere you go. So the main concentration of my work for politics of terrorism is pretty much far-right anti-government and far-right terrorist groups. There is far-left terrorist groups as well, but once again, that is the concentration. When I do teach the class, I do teach about the far-left as well.
And for those that don't know what John Jay is basically like the university for criminal knowledge. Maybe you could come up with a better description of what John Jay does, but it's like a staple in law enforcement. Many people who are pursuing careers in law enforcement will get a degree from John Jay because it's the consolidation of all of that research for education.
Yeah, you got it spot on. People from other countries will actually send their law enforcement to John Jay for training to learn about politics of terrorism, victimology, criminology, or crime scene investigation. John Jay is it's in the top 3 at least for colleges for law enforcement.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, one of the best schools, great campus. I love it there.
Yeah, it's a really awesome place. I've met a ton of people that have pursued careers in law enforcement, and even people who have changed the track to become more like lawyerly. But that is, if you want to learn about these topics, that is one of the few places in the world that anyone could go to and get a solid education in a number of different concepts within criminal justice. Just for context for people, but I'm old enough to remember, like when I was a kid in the 90s, I remember that neo-Nazi thing, that era of right-wing terrorists, Elohim City, Oklahoma City bombing people, When I lived in Nebraska, one of my teachers, who's been a staunch advocate for civil rights for forever, when he was in college, he was doing some work on hate groups, and he wrote a letter to, at the time, one of the biggest distributors of neo-Nazi propaganda who lived just outside of our city in Nebraska. Gerhard something. And he ended up getting the FBI called to his house because they're like, why are you ordering all this? But he explained, like, I'm doing work on this. But that when I was aware of terrorism, or like when I became aware of what that was kind of what I understood was happening in America. Now, after 9/11, the view of terrorism shifted a little bit. The focus of who was the terrorist changed. It didn't completely forget all of the right-wing stuff, but it shifted to Middle Eastern terrorists, Al-Qaeda kind of deal. So in the past couple years, it's kind of shifted back toward the neo-Nazi thing. And I'm wondering if you could maybe if you can provide a little bit of context from where it was in the 80s and 90s, how disruptive the early 2000s were, and then how we're finding ourselves heading back in that same direction.
So let's look at the peak of terrorism here, 1970s. You had probably about 3 to 5 terrorist attacks a week throughout the whole freaking decade. And a lot of those were far right groups. One of the most infamous ones was the bombing of LaGuardia Airport. They still don't know who did that. They could have been a Serbian nationalist. They don't know because he probably blew up with the bomb. You also have Francis Tavern in Lower Manhattan by Puerto Rican nationalists. That was blown up right there. And also you have the Weatherman Underground, which blew up just about anything.
Yeah.
When you do a terrorist act, it's important you know it is a press release. You're communicating to a broader audience. It is a press release. It's not random. It is a press release. Francis Tavern, once again, the Puerto Rican nationalist group, they use that because that's where Washington gave his speech to his soldiers after the Revolutionary War. That is pretty much the birth of the country. Great place. And if you want to spend $50 for a shot of not such good whiskey, you go there.
It's a fun little spot in Lower Manhattan.
It is cool. Yeah. If you don't spend money, it's even better. But once again, they look for that symbolism. You know, when the Weatherman Underground did targets, they focused on Dole Fruit Company because allegedly that was tied to Vietnam, which probably wasn't, but in their mind it was.
Yeah.
So they do this for communication. And it's also for recruitment. A lot of terrorist attacks happen in clusters, just like school shootings. They happen in clusters with copycats. So once again, this is a broader audience and inspires. Now, a terrorist is interchangeable. He could be right, left, it doesn't matter. It is a personality that is absorbed. So for the most part, it's someone that lacks their own identity and they get their identity from a broader movement or through the violence. Let's see. Let's look at the mad bomber of New York City, George Minsky. George Minsky had no political doctrine whatsoever. He was just pissed off at Con Ed, and he struck New York City from like the mid-40s to the mid-50s, various bombs. The reality was his terrorism was against pretty much Con Ed because he got electrocuted, and not to be too graphic, he suffered intimate issues with his wife after that, and his whole life fell apart, and he wanted Con Ed to compensate for this. So anything that was a Con Ed transmitter, he blew up in the city. They call him the Mad Bomber. Fast forward, Weatherman Underground and all these leftist groups, oh, he's anti-capitalism. No, he's just crazy. But the reality is they took that as something as anti-capitalism. And from there, they defined it, and he inspired a future generation, once again, of terrorists. You know, when we talk about far-right terrorists, they all lack personalities. They all lack something. And, you know, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole if that's okay.
Please. That's what we're here for. Yeah.
You know, you know, when you look at the Unabomber specifically and his characteristics, and even with other terrorists, there's a good portion of them that are incels, involuntary celibacy. Once again, when someone's an incel, he's sexually awkward. He lacks personality. He really is insecure. And once again, they can go either way. They're fluid. And when they just happen to get into a right wing or left wing, they adopt that as their full personality. And that's the danger, you know? And these terrorist attacks are not just to, like, you know, express their gripes, but they're also used for a form of recruitment as well. You know, now we talk about the Middle East terrorism, the fundamentalist terrorism. That's not saying it's new, but it's pretty new. You got to look at the evolution of these groups in the Middle East. Believe it or not, they were pretty far left. And that's a crazy thing. People forget about it. They're decolonization movements that were far left that worked with other decolonization movements in Latin America. And then when they got cut off from Latin America, and then when you had the Mujahideen with Afghanistan and all this other stuff, they got funding to become far right, because a lot of those Middle Eastern countries were worried about a socialist communist takeover.
Yeah.
So they took that money and became far right. And literally, the people that were far left became far right in the 80s. It is crazy. But once again, let's look at it. The whole concept is fluid. Once again, that's how they define themselves. They lack their own personality, their own social bonds, and they find it with these groups. When we talk about terror groups or being recruited for terrorism, think of a cult. People forget that. It's more like a cult. And of course, there's a lot of innocent people. Even when we talk about terrorist attacks, they have symbolism. World Trade Center, Pentagon. Yep. Al-Qaeda was sending a press release saying they're against world trade. They're against militarization. They were sending that press release. If Al-Qaeda wanted to get maximize casualties, they would have flew a bunch of planes into Giant Stadium in a sold out concert. that's what they would have done. Once again, not taken away from the horrors that they did. It was horrible,
Sure,
but
course, yeah.
once again, all terrorism has symbolism, and that's another fact that people overlook. And we ping back and forth like the 80s. You had the Christian identity movement, which was coming out of the 70s. Was it Robert Matthews? He influenced a whole generation of terrorists such as Timothy McVeigh. People don't talk about him. And it all comes, the far-right terrorism comes from one specific crazy little book called The Turner Diaries.
Yep.
Once again, I'm sorry to be bouncing around. You can stop me anytime.
No. This is all, in my opinion, this is all like important context to understand where we're at today. So keep going.
Okay, cool.
Turner Diaries. Yeah.
The Turner Diaries is a wet dream for far right extremist groups. That's the best way to put it. Grammatically, it sucks, but, is there really, the guy does kill the English language in that book, something horrible. But besides that, it is, if you really, really, really want to see the next right-wing terrorist attack, you read that book. Essentially, that's where we go. Like Day of the Rope. The Day of the Rope is always talked about in the book. The day that when we're going to literally put those far left congressmen and media moguls in a rope and hang them. And it's crazy when they sacked the when they sacked the Capitol on January 6th, what was spray painted on the wall? Day of the Rope.
Wow.
So, those groups that got pardoned, that is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Because they were spray painting Day of the Rope. Was it the Oath Keepers? Once again, they followed the Turner Diaries. Keck, they followed the Turner Diaries, and they were all there. It was like a pep rally for them. And once again, you saw a lot of that symbolism from Christian identity movement and all the way through the Turner Diaries. And I know it sounds crazy, I'm lumping them, but you got to look at the personalities that take these type of people. In Long Island, we have the loud majority. I'm pulling it back to locality here. We have the loud majority and Karens for, Moms for Liberty. I call it the Karens for Liberty. But Moms for Liberty, excuse me. They're both considered anti-government, and Moms for Liberty is considered kind of a hate group, especially LGBTQT. And, they go to the school boards and they lose their mind over readings. I think their gripe is Anne Frank. It's white apologetism or whatever. They're just out of their mind. But that's besides the point. Loud Majority, it was a group that was really prominent. Quite a few of them showed up. But Loud Majority, though they just drive around with their pickup trucks with their Trumpy flags, doing their Trumpy parades, they seem harmless. They meet at Belmore train station every so often, and it's like a cult in itself. A lot of those members were picked up for other groups, the Tactical Association, Oath Keepers, et cetera, et cetera. So once again, it became a recruitment vehicle without even them knowing for another group. It's like they graduate. Loud Majority's elementary, maybe the Tactical whatever group is middle school, and then Oath Keepers is going to be a high school. So that becomes a vehicle in itself.
It's a pipeline.
Yeah, exactly.
Pipeline, yeah.
So Talk It Patriot was another group that was a pipeline. Once again, these groups try to frame themselves as political groups, but I guess in their mind they are. But even when you pull a couple of them aside to talk to them, their politics is not really aligned with anything they're talking about. When you pull them aside and just break it down to them 101. They're just looking for like something to do. They're looking for a support group, which is
cause.
A cause, a support group, something, or maybe just trying to get their frame of history and, be in that frame of history. And it's kind of pathetic. And, it's like you break things down. It's like, so you're against free community college? No, I'm for that. Oh, okay. So you don't believe in taxing billionaires? Oh, no, I'm for that. Okay. It's like when you break it down, are you pro-life? No, pro-choice. Okay. But they just want to be part of that group. It sounds silly.
Sure.
But these are your people living in your mom's basement at age 40 and they don't understand why they're there and they don't want to blame themselves. So they need someone to blame. When Trump took office, some of the things he said is, let me be your voice for your frustration. that's pretty freaking dangerous when he said something like that, you know, because you have these groups that said, yeah, I got frustration.
Well, I think the scariest part to me, as somebody who's looked into these things my whole life, you know, even probably when I was too young to be looking into them, but just because it was fascinating to me, the thing that really scares me about the future of where we're headed is that we've got our fingers on a bunch of very dangerous buttons, and the group that's in power is convinced that if they change some things, it's going to go back to this reminiscent idea of what America was, or but at what cost? Like, okay, so we can make it like this idealized version of 1940s that you want, 1940s America, but we lose ability to say what we want to say on the internet. We're already seeing how the internet is like playing into this. In the UK now, you can't post political memes without getting into actual legal trouble. Like, the police will come knocking at your door. And I'm interested in like what in your study of these things, how exponential was the rise of these groups post-internet? Because I imagine before the internet, it was like you'd have to get a pamphlet, or you'd see some guys on a street corner and you'd pick up their reading. You'd be a disaffected youth and you'd be sucked right into it. But the internet makes that pipeline so much more convenient. And like, what, I guess, just like, how has it exploded? Has organization of these types of groups exploded since the internet, leading us to where we're at now?
Essentially, yes. I really think it would have been big regardless, because we do have a change in demographics. Once again, replacement theory is real.
Yeah.
So I think it's place and time when it comes to this. But when you look at William Luther Pierce, the guy that wrote the Turner Diaries, back in the 70s and even the 80s, what was he doing? He was having his group create video games for computers, like trying to make the neo-Nazi video games for DOS, essentially. He was trying to get ahead of the curve with technology. So do I think the internet with the chat rooms, like, has the Facebook and social media become the new town square? Yeah, it has become the new town square. You know, Parler is one of the best examples. You know, that's how they were all freaking communicating on January 6th. It's become more cost effective, let's put it that way, versus printing up a bunch of pamphlets. You know, ISIS does their recruit, the far right does their recruit through this, the base does their recruiting through this, through various chat rooms. Was it 4chan? Is that the one? I keep getting that.
Yeah, that is like the epicenter.
Yeah. So, you know, the internet has exploded, you know, it has reached out, and even the incel community, especially, you know, that's the other thing. Like, they got their own little sphere, their own little world of, and it is advertised, you know, especially with the crazy conspiracies. Because what keeps a lot of these groups together? Crazy crackpot conspiracies. You know, you have to show you're against something. You have to show you're preserving something. During the replacement theory of the 30s and 20s and 30s, they were talking about the white Anglo-Saxon was becoming a minority for these Southern Italians, Southern Europeans such as myself. And, you know, they said people like me were going to force recruitments and make them all Catholic back then. Well, and they also said it was a Jewish conspiracy. You have the Protocols, the Elders of Zion.
Yep.
So once again, there is a weaving of conspiracies that is attached. And once again, it was the book and all that pamphlets that did spread it. So yeah, it is spreading through rapid fire through the internet now. That is true. Look at, what is it called? QAnon theory?
Oh yeah, QAnon. Yep.
QAnon. Yeah, right.
Yep.
It is
which started on 4chan.
It started on 4chan. Yeah, of course. There we go. It does spread, but my argument is it spreading through a niche group, or is it spreading through a broader audience? That's my argument. Because not everyone has 4chan on their phone. Right. You know, that's the thing, you know, like, what's the bridge? That's my whole gripe, if that makes any sense, because you're going to have that. Yeah, you're going to have that niche audience that does crazy shit regardless. They're going to expand, but is it going to expand to a mainstream? QAnon is something on how it expanded, how it became an epidemic through mainstream. That is crazy. Because when you're driving, you see the Q when you're driving on cars. You're like, holy shit, you know? Not all these people can be looking through 4chan. So my question is, how did it become a pandemic through mainstream media? And, you know, that's what we battle today, you know? And even when we're battling that and trying to regulate that, even look at it, how do you come up with a balance for free speech? You know, like in Germany, you can't say the Holocaust never happened. In Germany, you can't use racial slurs. Here, you can. But at the same time, there's a duality with free speech. You know, you have the right to listen to it and you have the right just to walk away from it. So there's a tough balance here when it comes to social media and recruitment. You know, there really is a tough balance. We discussed this last time, the Bund.
Yeah.
They were having those rallies in Madison Square Garden saying, it's our free speech. At the same time, they're advocating making a fascist dictatorship with no free speech.
Yeah.
So it becomes a tool in itself. Did I address your question here?
No. This is great. You know, and this is the thing that's scary to me, is that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Yet there's always going to be crazies. And the more freedoms we have, the more choices that can be made, the more likelihood that people are going to do crazy shit. That's unavoidable.
Unfortunately.
You know, the Anarchist Cookbook, the Turner Diaries, there's a million resources for anyone to learn how to do any of these things. I mean, the Turner Diaries, they talk about bombing a federal building, and then somebody bombed a federal building. So like there's a danger that I am not ignorant to, of having the ability to the free speech to disseminate this kind of information. But I also am much more scared of a world where the government is completely in control of what we can say or do or think at some point in the near future. And you know, that's the dangerous double-edged sword. I understand that living in a free and open society means I have to hear shit I don't like, but then some people are going to hear that and they're going to get inspired to do it. You know, like people like you and me, we're going to hear that and we're going to be like, that's crazy. That's great that we found out who is saying that, but that is just crazy. We should not be putting that out there. But now, you know, it's just becoming, in the past 10 or 15 years, we're getting into a lot of, I guess here's where I'm trying to go with this. So it was everyone's understanding up until really recently that their biggest threat was more right wing as opposed to left wing. And the past couple years, it's shifted to people being more concerned about left wing, and I feel like they're kind of forgetting about the right wing. What is there? I know they've always existed, but what have you noticed in trends in full spectrum terrorism or terrorist behavior or organization? Because again, this is people like you and I. We might talk to somebody who we disagree with, and we can walk away without getting into a fist fight.
Yes.
But everybody isn't like that. And like you're saying, especially the groups that get kind of siloed into these things, the incel types, the lone wolf, the disaffected from society types. You know, where do you see the biggest threat as the next 10 or 15 years, just from those groups, not necessarily what our society's reaction is going to be to it, but like, what do you think is the big threat?
Validating them. Validating them. You can say all your dumb stuff on the internet. You have the right to walk away. You could look at the guy on the street corner at the bar or whatever, and he's talking about, I don't know, replacement, this, that, the immigrants, whatever. You could just look at him like he's a crackpot loser. That's fine. But when you validate him, that's the problem. That goes to school shootings and just about everything. Let me break it down on the smallest level here. When the administration we have, name unknown, we're not going to mention that name, when they literally pardoned everyone from January 6th and called them freedom fighters, that literally gives them the validation they need for recruitment.
Yeah.
Really bad idea. Really bad. When you sit there and say Proud Boys stand down, once again, the accelerationist, not terrorist, but accelerationist, really bad. Got it? When you sit there and say call out Antifa as a threat. What are you going to do? Create more Antifa.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's what you're going to do. The person we have in power is an idiot. He is literally validating them. You don't do that. When Obama talked about ISIS, he didn't say ISIS because you realize when you say ISIS, you're validating that they have a caliphate.
Yeah.
You call them Daesh, because you're not validating them. When Bush and Obama in their presidencies were discussing criminal trials versus military trials for Al-Qaeda members in Guantanamo Bay, that was a real healthy conversation because Al-Qaeda does not want to be seen as a criminal. They want to be seen as military combatants. And you put them in a civilian trial, they're criminals.
Yeah.
You give them a military tribunal, they're military combatants and they're a sovereign country, just like Nuremberg or whatever they're talking about. Seriously. So validation is bad. That makes the distinction between them just talking and becoming that force that's dangerous. By the way, sorry about the cursing, but I don't know any other way to express it.
We're 100% okay with that here.
Okay,
speak
good.
freely. Free speech, man.
Free speech, good. I don't know what other way to put it either, you know? Even when I teach the class, I drop the F word every so often too. But validation is by far one of the worst things you could do. You can probably have all the free speech and all this, but once you validate them from a high power, that's bad. Let me just break down something. And I'm not trying to validate anyone here, so don't think I am. When Newtown happened, the school shooting in Newtown, Anderson Cooper from CNN came out there. He's like, I'm not mentioning the school shooter's name. And everyone was bashing Anderson Cooper. It's like, why do you not mention Adam Lanza? He's the person that did it. Like, oh, you freaking crazy leftist. No, Anderson Cooper knew exactly what the he was doing because Anderson Cooper knew school shootings happen in clusters. And when you validate the next school shooter, another school shooter is going to go to good old Google and look who Adam Lanza is and become the next school shooter. Uvalde, he loved Adam Lanza when he did that school shooting. He had so much paraphernalia on that. Once again, the media, not Anderson Cooper though, but the media outside of Anderson Cooper validated Adam Lanza for the Newtown shooting, which created more clusters of school shootings. I'm not saying do media blackouts, but make sure we don't use the buzzwords on reporting it. Don't call ISIS a caliphate because they're not. Military trials versus civilian trials. Civilian trials, you're a criminal. That's great. You know, screw that. Let's go back real quick. Nuremberg trials. When they're putting Hermann Goering and all these, well, he wound up killing himself, but whatever. When they got all these Nazis in the Nuremberg trials up on trial, they requested a military execution to be shot. How were they executed?
They hung, right?
They hung like a criminal because that's what they were. They wanted that validation of being shot. Well, that validation of being shot could have created a fourth freaking Reich. And that is an issue. So once again, validation at high powers is the worst thing you could do. Like, honestly, I think we can have the crazy people on 4chan talk all day, but when you have a president validate them, that is the worst thing you could do. When you have the media validate them, that's the worst thing you could do. When you have the media repeat their conspiracies, that is the worst thing you can do. You want to keep them as outliers. You want to keep them as losers. Keep them as isolated as possible in their little corners on social media. Don't give them a megaphone. But that's the problem. We're very reactionary. We're arm jerk reactionary. That's what we do. And that is the problem. That's why you get more of these. That is why we have the spread of it. We have a guy that loves to freaking validate them in speeches. You know, we got the media that loves tea, you know, and they love to put it out there. Validation is by far the most dangerous thing. Once again, I started this whole thing. A terrorist attack is a press release. You're sending a press release to communicate with a broader audience. If there's no press release, there's no communication.
Yeah.
You cut them off.
Well, I mean, definitely between the president and the media, and again, even before he came into power, the media, they just love the fear. Like they know it's going to keep eyeballs on keeping people scared. So let's just keep driving the point home. But even as a younger kid, I was able to realize, isn't this making more of them want to do it? they can be glorified like this on TV, and now you just gave them a reason to go do whatever crazy shit they're thinking about.
Yeah.
You know, I also too, the thing that has always hurt my head is like, what is a terrorist? Like, terrorist is, somebody is a terrorist because you're speaking from a certain position. Like, you know, the founding fathers, to the British, they were terrorists, right? You know, it's the matter of perspective there. And the thing that I remember reading a lot about in the later 90s, early 2000s was the idea that in the future, the average citizen of America will be like the domestic terrorist. This was a thing, you know, that I was definitely hearing a lot around post 9/11 and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, how like a lot of these emerging groups that have now become what they are. And again, I feel like people don't understand how fragile and delicate and unique the American system is here. And with a few dumb people behaving in a stupid way, that whole idea of what we think this country is could easily go away. And there's a piece of me that can't help but think that at some level, that from a military perspective is a good idea. Like, why not let the people rile each other up? Why not create a situation where the military has to come in and assume the total control that any military typically wants? So I'm kind of interested in your take on, like, what does this mean as things intensify more, as these groups get more emboldened and more powerful to greater extents? What does this mean for the life of the average citizen? At what point does the average citizen become a terrorist in the eyes? You see what I mean? Like the spectrum of what we're classifying is a terrorist act or terrorist behavior is constantly expanding. At what point does that start to bleed over into like people like you and I, who again have no desire to commit terrorist acts or be violent? At what point does that start to infringe upon us? You know, even having minor opinions or weighing in on certain things or aligning with certain groups that are through the spider web connected to other things.
So this is a good question. That's a really good question, because we've seen that happen many times. Joseph Stalin's purges, you know, Hitler loved using the word terrorist. Everyone was a freaking terrorist. Communists were terrorists. Socialists were terrorists. Artists that didn't like his art were terrorists. Jewish people were terrorists. He weaponized the word terrorist while committing terrorism with the brown shirts, essentially. You know, and then doing, you know, allegedly the Reichstag fire, which was set by socialists. A lot of people believe it was a red flag operation to get Nazi power, essentially. Once again, weaponizing the word terrorist, always dividing them versus us. You know, it's a playbook. It's a playbook that's reoccurring.
Tried and true. Yeah.
Tried and true. Exactly. And it's very effective. Let's be honest. But in America, I always, okay. You know, when Trump's always calling freaking the the anti-Gaza wars, them terrorists, you know, he's always reframing that, you know, and we can have our views on that. That's fine. You know, we can have the views about the whole conflict. But once again, someone protesting against a war, is that terrorism? You know, that's not. Right. That's not terrorism. You know, that's someone expressing their views, you know, like I could be vice versa, you know, and I still don't think it's terrorism. But once again, it's about weaponizing the word. I don't think the average American is ever going to become considered a terrorist. I'm very optimistic, believe it or not. Despite the dire situation we're in right now, if anything about history and studying it and policy has taught me anything, we're more resilient than we think.
Yeah.
And I really do think at the end of the day, 79-year-old man, you know, there's not many years ahead of him, you know, obviously, you know, like nature takes its course.
Yeah, right. Time's coming. Yeah,
time's coming, you know, and there's going to be a changing of the guard like there always is for every generation. And I'm very optimistic about this country. The direction now, I feel a certain way. And, you know, I'm a moderate personally. I joke around and call myself a radical moderate because moderates have become radical, essentially.
Yeah.
I do believe in dialogue. I guess that makes me radical nowadays too.
Yeah, that's the main reason why it's radical.
I'm a radical dialogue terrorist, I guess. But going back to this, though, I do believe that this shall pass. I don't think where the average American is going to be seen as a terrorist. I believe the divisions we have, we come together, we divide. In the 30s, I think we were way more divided. We had a putsch almost every freaking week. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was almost overthrown every other week, though the guy secured 3 terms, So I do think we were divided worse. I do think this is new to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, I think we'll be fine. I don't think an opposition party like the Nazis essentially used, or even what Stalin used, I don't think we're gonna come down to that point. Once again, I could be wrong, but once again, history has told me that we're more resilient than you think.
Well, and one thing I've always realized about even just the most general of samplings of anybody from any area of this country is that most people don't want violence.
No.
Most people go to great extents to avoid violence. Even if they strongly disagree with somebody, very few people are actually willing to take it to the level of violence, which is definitely something that works to our advantage. I've thought about it a lot. What if there were rogue factions of people roaming the neighborhood causing problems? Well, at least in my neighborhood, they'd get the shit kicked out of them. And it wouldn't be a viewpoint thing. It's just like everyone on my block in New York is like, no, not on this block. You can go do this somewhere else and see how you fare, but not here. And in that way, it's always been like society's job to police that. That is what society is to me, is like how we come to a general understanding of getting people to live together is basically just saying like, don't be an asshole, and we won't have to get into a fight, and we can deal with whatever differences.
Well, let's look at this real quick. Let's look at New York back in the 70s and look at New York today. Social bond theory. Let's bring that again. Back in Bed-Stuy, back in the 70s, was it 77 when they had the blackout and they burned down Bed-Stuyvesant practically? Well, we had a bunch of blackouts. We had a lot of strife, turmoil, and we still didn't burn down Bed-Stuy or the Bronx. Yeah, a few stores got their windows broken, but it was nothing like the 70s. Because once again, like I discussed, social bond. Now that average person in Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, that was making nothing a year in the 70s is now making probably on an average of 65,000 today.
Yeah.
So, if you got a Molotov cocktail in your hand, you got to think twice about your pension before you throw that.
Yeah.
You got something to lose here, social bonds. And that's another thing. The Weimar Republic under Nazis, it collapsed, and then it was starting to rebound, but it wasn't rebounding fast enough. There was people that lacked social bonds and that collective commitment to that greater government. No matter how dire it is, here in New York and everywhere else, you have people in the middle class, and they're thinking about security, they're thinking about their kids, et cetera, et cetera. We're not dire yet. Let's look at the Middle East with a lot of terrorism that has slowed down. Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, you had all these outlying groups. Now they're becoming more moderate. They're becoming more centered. Well, what's the force that's making them more centered? A growing freaking economy, an equal, not communist here, but a more equal distribution of wealth through a growing middle class. Like a lot of crazy Wahhabis that were running around saying, we got to overthrow, make this. Well, now they own their own house. Now they're feeling a certain way. Now they're going, oh, this is working for me now. So you still got your outliers, but you have more of a social bond with the greater community. And that is another reason why I think we'll never be that way, unless we drop to third world status with like 40% unemployment and starvation. Yeah.
It really becomes kill or be killed kind of deal.
Yeah, it does. It does. Or maybe if you're just a straight suppressed minority that has absolutely nothing, that becomes a breeding ground as well. Our biggest threat right now for terrorism is incels, socially awkward people. That's our biggest threat right now. People that can't talk to women or talk to the significant other. That has become our threat. People that feel like they're left behind.
Yeah.
But once again, that is still an outlier. That's not 40% of the population.
Well, that is something that I have just spent a lot of time thinking over, just looking really for me, I started noticing this. The first one that seemed strange to me, I don't know if you remember the shooter who shot up the Batman premiere.
Oh God, yeah.
Right? And I
Yeah.
just remember seeing the look in his eyes and being like, what? That is a very strange blank stare. And I feel like a whole list of the shooters that have come since that point, like even the Columbine shooters in their pictures, they didn't have this same like lifeless stare that I feel like a lot of the modern terrorist actors have. And, you know, again, it's like this part of the pipeline that they found themselves got them programmed into this way of thinking where like this was the only reasonable solution to their problem. Or in some ways it's like even more chaotic than that. It's like they don't necessarily see a problem. They just wanted to cause harm and violence. And you know, again, I love the internet. And I understand that these people are like typically relegated to very small, you know, specific chat groups and ways of thinking. But it's like, you know, how do you combat that? How do you make somebody who's that disaffected? Can you even rehabilitate that? You know, does it, you know, I wish I could pull up a picture of all of the shooters who've done some crazy terrorist shit in the past 10 or 15 years, but they all just look like at some point they needed a hug that they didn't get. You know what I mean?
It's funny you said that because there's a famous TED talk about a guy that almost became a school shooter. If you go on YouTube and look it up, the TED talk about a school shooter. And that's the one thing he said. He was living like he had no social bond, no connection to a community. He bought a gun. He was plotting to shoot up the school in Colorado. Geez, I don't know why Colorado did them. Well, Colorado gets a lot of these shootings. It's horrible. But he was planning to shoot up the school. He even knew about other school shooters. He had a little running tally of what numbers to beat, which was disturbing as hell. And his friend, his only friend, who he robbed, treated like said, hey, instead of going to school today, let's just watch a movie because it's Tuesday. Why not? And that literally stopped the shooting. Something small like that someone cared. And, you know, you feel touched for a moment, you know, but, you know, giving a hug is a good thing. Like we all desire affection, you know. When I'm sad, I want a hug. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, I think it takes more of a special person, not a special person, more of like a nefarious. I think there's more play into it than just a hug. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but it's just more playing into it to a hug. The guy Paddock, I forgot his first name. The guy that did the Las Vegas shooter.
Yeah, Vegas shooter.
Yeah. That did he had a girlfriend. He had a lot of hugs. He just stopped talking to her by his own will and loaded up guns in a Las Vegas room and horribly killed a bunch of innocent people. Like, I don't know what the answer is. I can tell you what the problem is. That's kind of what the job is for me. I can write about it. We could do these little psychological assessments all day. But do we have a solution? That's the scary thing. We don't. We know how to prevent growing it, but can we rehabilitate someone like that? I don't know. Supposedly you could de-radicalize people. You could de-radicalize a terrorist, you know? Supposedly you could do that. Is it effective? I don't know.
Well, it's kind of what you're saying too, that there's like this cult mentality to it. So if they were programmed, you could unprogram them, but then who's reprogramming them? And what's to stop them from, again, finding themselves down another pipeline that turns them into a cult member of another type of radical belief set?
Exactly. You know, it's like taking a cork and hitting that cork with a hammer in a freaking bucket of water. It keeps coming back up. There's no easy solution. I will say, America de-radicalized Nazis at the end of World War II in various POW camps. That did work. But they didn't de-radicalize SS men.
Right.
They de-radicalized your lower levels. They believed the SS men were beyond redemption. but the 25 million Vermont and, essentially soldier grunts were redeemable. We were successful at that. So I really don't even think we have an idea on how to de-radicalize somebody. I really don't. We have a bunch of theories, but I don't have an easy answer for you on this one.
Well, I definitely don't think there is. This is a very complex topic, and it only gets more complex with the more groups that, kind of emerge. I guess the tangential thought there was like, so maybe we haven't gotten the de-radicalizing part down, but we have got the radicalizing part down. Yes. And I'm interested in instances through history where, in order to like root out a terrorist activity, our military or intelligence has like seeded it to like get somebody to get to a certain point where they could be committed of a crime or they could expose a network. And I've always felt like I understand from like an intelligence perspective why FBI or CIA would want to do that. That's how you'd expose a network. But then again, I'm also like, is that in some way like a snake eating its own tail? You know what I mean? Like, are we making, just by doing that, are we giving someone else now an excuse to be like, you know what, them, I'm going to get my get back?
Well, validation's real. I think we discussed that. And when you got the FBI looking into you,
yeah, right. I must be important. Yeah.
Yeah, you must be important. Weatherman Underground loved the FBI looking into them. And that was their cannon fodder right there. They just grew in numbers from there. But there's a duality. When you get someone that is a terrorist, you do have to hold them responsible. Weatherman Underground were not held responsible for the most part. Bill Ayers was declared what did he do? It was property damage, not terrorism.
They're all free. The ones that are alive are free, right?
For the most part, yeah. There's some in jail, but they got free and then freaking shot a Brinks armored truck guard. So they went to jail. But yeah, what we declare a terrorist is another thing too, as a society, and that's a big freaking problem. These are white kids that are upper middle class. And we said no, they're not terrorism. They just committed acts of vandalism. So it becomes an elitist freaking label too, because Bill Ayers is a freaking terrorist. Bernardine Dohan is a terrorist. They should have went to jail. It's funny because when we look at the Black Panthers, who are not a terrorist, they put them in jail. But Black Liberation Army's terrorist group, but not Black Panthers. There's a duality. And even when we discuss far right groups as well, when they're middle class, they're less likely to go to jail. Lower class, more likely to go to jail. So we have to be clear on our definition of what is essentially terrorism and who is a terrorist. We have to be clear on that. At the same time, we can't do validation, which makes it even more complicated.
Right.
So it's that fine line we got to walk. We can keep them talking their dumb stuff. We have to monitor them. We have to be clear and concise on a punishment. No dualities. But at the same time, you can't validate them. Once again, I do not envy the work of FBI people.
Yeah, no, sure.
Yeah, especially intelligence people. When I'm teaching this stuff in my class in John Jay, I get all these questions, and I'm like, guys, I'm just telling you what happened, where we're at, and what feeds it. I don't have an answer for you on how to stop it.
Right.
You guys are the answer. You're going to teach us better than me in the next 10 years, hopefully. I'm just telling you what the problem is. So, this is a fine line to cross, and you can't have a duality. It has to be clear and concise.
Do you also think that this is like a thing that is unique to the American experience in a certain way? Or I guess as I'm saying that, it's probably not, but like even going back to like the Civil War, I grew up in the South. I lived in the South. I've lived all over the country, but spent a lot of time in the South. And my time in Tennessee, I couldn't help but notice that there were so many, like the Confederacy is lauded down there. There's this thing down in Georgia called Stone Mountain with Confederate generals, and it's funded by the Daughters of the Confederacy. There used to be a huge statue on 40 coming into Nashville of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was one of the founders of the KKK.
Yep.
Ton of buildings on my campus, college campus, that were named after Confederate generals. Do you think there's like in some way, at least the right-wing terrorist groups in this country are like still pissed off about the Civil War? Because I feel like you don't see it. There are statues to Confederate generals in New York, right? That does exist, okay?
Yes.
But in the South, it's on display at a level that would shock you. Plus, the liberal mindset is few and far between out there. So I'm just kind of interested in like what your thoughts of like the fact that we maybe never maybe we never came to a full countrywide decision of like, okay, this was bad and that we're going to move forward together. Do you think that's why we have some of the problems that we have now?
Of course, we did not denazify. After World War II, anything that had a swastika came down. Anything that was a Nazi freaking got destroyed. Let's look at El Salvador for a second. Bukele declared freaking MS-13 a terrorist group, right? When he declared them a terrorist group, what did he do? He went through every cemetery, every marker, and destroyed everything and every stone that had MS-13 related on it because he was MS-13 in El Salvador, essentially. Because when you got these statues, what are you doing? You're validating the cause
emblazing,
again.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's a problem. You know, El Salvador, they destroyed anything that was MS-13 related. Anything. If you got an MS-13 tattoo, you're arrested too. Anything. Or better yet, maybe it might look like MS-13. Once again, that's a little extreme there. But going back to this, though, anything that was a marker to commemorate that, to use it as a martyr type thing, to grow the membership, got destroyed. Nazi Germany, anything that was related to Nazism after Germany became not Nazi, essentially, when you got West and East, was destroyed. No Nazi statues, Nazi SS men were buried in unmarked graves, without military honors, etc., etc. Once again, when you got Bedford Forrest in your state capital, and he's the leader and the founder of the KKK, what do you think's going to happen?
Right.
Or better yet, Pike. I think his name's Albert Pike. Yeah, Albert Pike. I know he did a lot of Masonic.
Freemason, but also a major player in the Confederacy.
Yeah, a major player in the Confederacy, and he did a lot of the Freemason rituals and stuff. I understand I might have a duality for a lot of people. When you're putting his statue back up, what does that send and what type of message?
Right.
I know Freemasons hold him in a high regard, but he was a treasonous.
Well, there's that's kind of like a whole other semi-tangent in the sense that like, Freemasons, the Freemasonic Brotherhood is how they organized the revolt, like the American Revolution. So there's like this weird, almost like, it's our duty to be the rabble rousers, or the duty to, there's like a pride that I'm a Mason. I was made a Mason in Tennessee. So this is something I'm very, very well aware of. And there are tons of Masons who love Albert Pike. The book that he wrote is called Morals and Dogma. That's like the biggest Masonic text, and people still kind of refer to that. But very few of them know the history. And like, I have been able to read that book with the understanding of what else Albert Pike did, like the other stuff that he was doing. Some people within Masonry, like they either choose to disregard the fact, all the stuff that he did when he wasn't a Mason, or they know about it and in some way it speaks to them, which is, horrifying.
That's an issue.
Of itself. Yeah.
Well, when we talk about Masons is a big organization. I'm in a fraternity, Alpha Phi Delta. And we got quite a few members that are Mason as well. I don't know much on it. I know about the 33rd degree, Scottish Rite, York Rite, Prince Lodge, all that other stuff. But, I'm assuming it's the same thing when it comes to my fraternity. We got 15,000 members. We're pretty big, and not all members all think alike.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think statistically that'd be pretty impossible. And if they all think alike, I think that's not a adult fraternity anymore. I think that's a cult.
Just a cult, yeah.
So once again, I'm not smearing Masons in general, but the thing is, Albert Pike, you do got to come to a reality. Well, at least most people should come to a reality that he was treasonist. He did commit sedition essentially against his country. And that's the thing, you're validating him essentially. You're validating the cause by keeping these up. You got the Confederate National Cemetery in Tennessee, I think Chattanooga.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
well, on Confederate flags, I've never lived in the South where people weren't openly flying them everywhere.
Yeah, but that's the thing. The flag's become a symbol for so much other stuff. It's crazy. It's become a symbol for any gripe you have.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That's a big problem. Oh, the government's too big. Let me fly a Confederate flag, and that's the thing. We didn't denazify after the Civil War.
Right.
The way Davisville was stalled, and some parts maybe did get through, but at the end of the day, we still haven't come to terms with that. Just think if we did. Just think if we were on the right trajectory of civil rights. Martin Luther King would have not been a civil rights activist. He would have been the first black president, essentially. So yeah, that's a huge factor right there. And that's pretty much the symbolism that a lot of far right nutty groups do use. And they get that validation again by having a cool statue. So.
Yeah, it's very strange. Even when I lived down there, it was before the Trump era. And even then it was like, this is a whole different world. It's a big reason why I moved up here, but yeah, I can't help but think that too. It's like, that is like to me, that flag is like not America. And the idea that it's but ironically by a group of people who are like, we love America. Nobody loves America more than us. But they're flying the Confederate flag. I don't know, the hypocrisy there.
Yeah.
But again, it just, it doesn't have to make sense because it's appealing to people's baser emotions, and that's why it's effective. And
that's another thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's another thing. We separate facts from emotions. That's a big thing. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's reality.
Right.
Your feelings are not meant to be rational. That's another thing. That's why they're called feelings and not ration.
Yeah.
Faith is not meant to be rational. Because if it was, it wouldn't be faith. And that's another big problem we have right there. I call it the Disney complex. We believe in like stuff that's crazy, essentially. Like even when we talk about what's reality right now, we got unemployment ticking up right now. Inflation is up. If you eat red meats, you're paying right now. Hope you enjoy that Argentinian beef. Let's put it that way. But like your food prices are up, but you will argue with someone from loud majority or someone, I don't know, from the different political spectrum, and they will argue you to blue in the face saying, no, inflation's not up by 15%. What are you talking about? It's like, bro, you were not paying this less than a year ago. I work with a lot of educated people that far right, not loud majority right or anything, but they're far right. They hook, line, and sinker like a cult, and they're really good people, but they really feed into some of this crazy shit. And they will argue with you till they're blue in the face, saying you don't know what you're talking about. Even when you present them the facts, they will still deny it. So once again, it's become the point that truth has become like obscured by our own prejudices at this point. And that's feeding into a lot of things right now. It's been colored by the personalities of the people that perceive what truth is. And that's scary right there. That is scary. And that is actually a great recruitment tool for people to have quote unquote alternative facts that do feed into the propaganda of things on 4chan.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the very razor we're talking about. Like, I feel like it's so important to talk about these things and to educate yourself on the real scope of the danger and scale of a lot of these groups and how it's kind of infiltrated society. But, how do we talk about it and not accidentally inspire somebody to become a part of it? But I think kind of what we were saying before, it all comes back to most people don't want violence. Most people don't want war. Most people just want to be able to live their life unimpeded by the threat of violence or theft or.
That's true.
That's what we have here. That's what's so unique about this country. And I just really hope that, again, the people on the extremes, they're the extremes. It's not the majority of people. Not the majority of people in your neighborhood are not that way.
They're the outliers.
Yeah.
The only thing is we got to make sure they stay the outliers.
Well, dude, Chris, thank you so much. This was super fun.
Yes.
I hope that we can, I'm not praying for some kind of terrorist activity, but I'm hoping maybe we can explore even more in depth into some of the specifics of this stuff. But this was a great kind of insight into this entire topic. And I feel, again, like it is something. How do you let people know that what a dangerous pipeline is? And it's explaining what a dangerous pipeline is. And anyone is susceptible. Everyone likes to think that they'll never be sucked into something like that. And I think they're being way too generous. We are all susceptible to that kind of programming. Given enough time and enough exposure to it, any one of us could be, channeled into some extreme group like that.
Yes, it is true. It's true. And it is scary. Once again, I don't have an answer on how to avoid something like that. But once again, it's all about receptible population. Who's more receptive to this? Your incel, your person that lacks their own identity, that tries to find it with a group or an ideology, and they become part of that. Once again, those are your terrorists, essentially, because all ideology of a terrorist group is interchangeable. And that's something people have to remember. It's a certain personality that absorbs into that stuff.
Well, Chris, thank you so much again. This has been super fun. We'll obviously have you back for further explorations of this. Everybody else, this has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'll have links to Chris's work in the descriptions below. Check out all of his awesome books, and we'll catch y'all in the next one. See you guys.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.